Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Gaming with me, Tony Mo, and we're here tonight doing some glorious live commentary. We got a match of pilots versus pilots, rocking and rolling on Colony, and we actually got in at the start of the match. I've been having that sort of plague where all of the matches I joined for pilots versus pilots are halfway through being completed. So fortunately, we've got a fresh match here, a fresh opportunity to do well, and we're going to be doing that with the Alternator. The Alternator is actually going to be the key SMG in my upcoming Pilot Padawan loadout. Now, to give you guys a little bit more of a teaser regarding that loadout, it's going to be a loadout that is very much focused on the equipment and the sort of concepts and the gameplay ideas that I've been using to do away with some of my shortcomings as a pilot over the last several months. Originally, I was actually going to be running the R97 in the car because those were the two weapons that I actually used the most while I was making use of this loadout. But the last 2 weeks, probably right before I got sick, I started tangoing with the Alternator again, remembering just how much I loved this weapon and just how badly I wanted to make it part of my primary, meta selection again. How much I was like, dude, this thing's so freaking cool. Why did I ever walk away from it? It was, for the longest time, my go-to weapon. In fact, it wasn't until last week, or the week before last, that the R97 finally replaced it as my most used and most effective weapon in Titanfall 2. So, the first month that the game was out, I mean, this is the only weapon I rocked and rolled with, guys. The only thing I used, it was all I cared about, I loved it to death, and I just was able to wrap my head around it. I stopped using it, though, for whatever reason. I think I might have started messing with the volts shortly after I jumped to Xbox One instead of PC. And I kind of just faded away from it. And then I remember picking it up here and there and just really doing poorly with it. So poorly with it that I didn't want anything to do with it at that point. I was like, ugh, just get this thing away from me. Why did I ever think this thing was any good? How can you use this weapon? It's madness. But it only took a little bit of time for me to remember why the Alternator was so good. And, you know, it's a very risk-reward weapon, I think. It obviously has some shortcomings, but at the end of the day, it is the most powerful SMG in the game. From a raw damage output perspective, it does more damage and kills people more quickly than any of the other SMGs. What that means is that you technically have an SMG that can directly compete with most of the rifles in the game from a damage output standpoint, which is a pretty big deal. I mean, if you look at the car or the R97, they have to do almost 2 times as much damage, or they have to land almost twice as many shots to do the same amount of damage that a rifle like the R2 or the G2 would do. So that's obviously a bit of a, you know, that's a bit of a difficulty within itself when going up against rifle users. So hold on a second, guys. The Alternator puts you on more of an even playing field in that regard, but you do have to deal with a much more excessive horizontal recoil, far more than even the Flatline has. And I think one of the biggest difficulties that most people have with the Alternator is the sort of, I want to say mental, sort of psychological disconnect when you actually look at the way the recoil with the Alternator works. I mean, there's nothing really here to tell you where the weapon's recoiling. All we get are these 2 brackets that extend outwards. They're not indicative of the way the recoil is traveling. If the brackets themselves went left to right and actually followed the recoil, well, then it'd be a hell of a lot easier for players to actually understand and to deal with the recoil, but they don't. They just kind of spray left and right. Like, it's just like, oh yeah, I pulled the trigger, it's recoiling. That's all they do. They actually, in my opinion, are more jarring than they are anything else. If anything, they make it more difficult to overcome that sort of, again, that mental disconnect when you look at the recoil. Oh, I really thought I could get him with the pulse blade. We weren't quick enough, a little bit more left, and we probably would have got him. So the first thing you have to do when you pick up the Alternator is pretty much ignore those 2 brackets completely. And in a lot of ways, I don't really pay attention to the reticle at all, other than using it to get my rounds on target. I'm more focused on just knowing that the Alternator is going to do one of 2 things depending on how hard or how long I pull the trigger. You're either going to get nice, precise, accurate fire if you tap fire or if you burst fire, or you're going to end up getting a big, wide, nearly uncontrollable spray if I decide to spray. Now, those things, of course, both have their strengths and weaknesses. Sometimes it's necessary to just go full auto, and I think in close quarters, the Alternator has to be one of the most devastating weapons outside of the EVA 8. You can simply hold the trigger and just go full melt mode, and that's where it really starts to shine as an SMG. You know, the car and the R97, they're great, and I'm not saying that you can't mow down players with them in extreme close quarter situations, but they're nothing like the alt. They are nothing like the Alternator when it comes to damage output. They're not even close. They could act and hope and wish, but they're just not there, and they never will be. That's just how powerful, how potent the damage output of the Alternator actually is. So it is an extreme close quarters melt mode weapon. And we start talking medium to long range, if you can get down the tap fire and those controlled bursts, well, then you're going to do just as well. You know, you're never really going to be able to compete with precision rifle fire at excessive long ranges, but hey, if I can drop 2 guys in a building just like that with a little bit of tap fire, a little bit of self-control, well, then you can do just about anything with the Alternator that you would ever need to do. It's just about building that mastery, building that knowledge of the weapon's recoil. It's not as inconsistent, it's not as random as you may think it is. It's got me thinking of a certain hip-hop artist I've been listening to quite a bit lately. This is, oh, never mind. No one's going to understand the reference anyways, and I can't rap. We'll leave that to the Gyarados and the iniquities of this world. Let's get back into the fray. So really, one of the big things that I ended up doing with this loadout was to, number one, give people a set of gear, a set of equipment that I think would help them deal with some of the same shortcomings that I dealt with, while also, in turn, with the Alternator, asking them to, you know, break away from their typical SMG fare and take on something that most people, I think, deem a little bit more difficult. I think the Alternator is really worth the challenge. I think the reward of using this thing, of understanding its recoil and wrapping your head around it it's just so worth it, man. You end up with a really high damage SMG. And it's, you know, for somebody who personally has been struggling a lot to deal with rifles, you know, like, how do you take on a really good rifle user? You know, someone who's already a great pilot, who doesn't miss much, who is just a really good shot, and who is using something as powerful as an R2 or a G2. You know, how do you deal with someone like that while also still using an SMG? Because I want to. You know, I like the mobility that comes with SMGs, and I'm not a huge fan of rifles, at least not currently, while I'm trying to boost my mobility and focus on my speed and whatnot. So the Alternator ended up being that answer. The answer that I didn't really know was there, but that was there all along, you know, and that was really cool. I can't believe I didn't get that guy. Did you guys see that? Oh, man. I'm getting really feisty with the Pulse Blades recently. Really getting a lot of cool close quarter kills with them. The problem is I then think I can pull it off all the time. And then like 90% of the time I fail miserably, so... Now, one of the other great things about the alt that I should mention is if you like to go fast, or if you're somebody who's just learning how to go fast, the Alternator is one of those weapons that just respects your ability to go fast. It's like, hey, you want to go fast and still be accurate? You want to go fast and still kill people and not have to worry about your accuracy or your recoil being affected by your speed? Well, the Alternator is the weapon for you. Sign up today and get your first month of Alternator usage for free. Oh, we got ourselves really stuck on that one. So here's my thing for you guys. The Padawan Pilot loadout is just around the corner now. I'm getting footage for it, putting the rest of it together, you know, getting my thoughts and my my sort of personal tips together for it. It should be dropping within the next couple weeks, hopefully sooner. I just got to play a little bit of catch-up in terms of capturing footage. Outside of that, though, I'd like to see you guys maybe dive into the Alternator a little bit. Give this thing another chance. I know there's some of you out there who rock and roll with it already. There's a certain person by the name of the Kid Hines. I don't know if he ever watches any of my videos, but I ran into him several times on the Frontier now, and he is an ace pilot. He's a member of Sage Squad, I believe. I'm not entirely sure, but he's really good. One of the better Alternator pilots out there for sure. And he was definitely one of the people who made me think twice about going back to the Alternator. So a big shout out to him. Do yourself a favor, give this thing a go. If you guys got any other questions or thoughts in regards to the Alternator, any other weapons you've been thinking about playing with recently, anything you've maybe dove back into that you haven't messed with since launch, let me know down in the comment section below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, remember to play smart, remember to play to challenge yourself, but most importantly, remember to play for fun.